Hello, and welcome back to another episode of What Do Scientists Do, a podcast from Supernova at Dalhousie. Today's episode, we talk to Lindsee Clark. She does ocean conservation in Newfoundland and Labrador, using a bunch of cool different technologies to figure out how the oceans are and what we can do to help protect them. She talks to us about invasive species like the green crab and how to tell them apart. So keep on listening to find out more. So, hello and welcome to What Do Scientists Do? This is a podcast where I interview a wickedly smart sciencey guest and learn all about what they do and what they know. Today, we're going to be learning about ocean conservation. So, conservation is the science of maintaining, protecting, and restoring ecosystems from destruction. And a lot of this destruction is, unfortunately, caused by human activity. So our guest today works specifically in the field called ocean conservation. So if you can piece those words together, you'd figure it out that we're working, or our guest is working to protect the ocean from all the things that are changing it. So here to tell us all about ocean conservation is our very special guest. Can you introduce yourself with your name and pronouns?
Awesome. Yes, I can. Good day to everyone. My name is Lindsee Clark, and I use the pronouns she, her.
And what kind of scientist are you, Lindsee?
I am a fisheries research technologist. So it's a really cool branch of science where I actually get to work to support someone who has a PhD, so another research scientist. I basically work under their guidance to carry out the field logistics, some data analysis, and different stats for whatever scientific project is within this PhD's field. I basically work under a framework of other people and collaboratively with other scientists to do work in the ocean sector.
Awesome. So what would a typical day look like for you?
I love this question because I asked this in my job interview for this job, and it varies so greatly. Depends on the time of year, which is something that I really enjoy. We work in almost like a boom and bust cycle. So we have a really heavy field schedule whenever the weather is nice. So typically late spring, summer, and fall, especially here in Newfoundland and Labrador, the window is fairly small. So we work when we can. During field season, I mostly will be actually in a boat on the ocean, doing eelgrass planting, monitoring that eelgrass that I've planted, and doing different techniques to see if how we're replanting is working. And field season means that we're collecting data, and then during the off season, so the cold season now, I actually will process that data. So in the off season, you typically start as regular office hours, so from like 8:30 to 4:30, and I do stats. I look at scientific video. I process all the data that I have collected during the field season. And field season is not during office hours. Field season is essentially whenever the tides and the weather are working. So lots of times I'll be working from 4 or 5 o'clock in the morning until late at night. To get done what we have to do to fulfill our goals. So it's very variable and it's very high pace, which is something that I really enjoy.
So you really like having all of these different kinds of things on the move and the go?
Absolutely, I do. I have ADHD, so it is something that really captures my interest to constantly be, I guess, adapting to different situations, whether it be equipment malfunction, weather malfunction, tide malfunction. There's lots of different things that happen, and no one day is the same. And that kind of sounds cheesy, but it's very true when it comes to any sort of field work. You're constantly taking in information and then tweaking your methods to suit the weather, the equipment that you have and the personnel that you have. So that's something that I really enjoy because every day is like a puzzle that I have to solve, and I can kind of come home and physically look at what I've done during the day and be proud of that.
That's so cool. So you mentioned you have ADHD. And I wonder if you just want to like talk about what your experience is like having ADHD and working in academia.
Absolutely. It's something that I really enjoy talking about because I find there's lack of representation specifically of women with ADHD in academia. I always kind of felt out of place in the time that I've spent in academia because you're surrounded by people who are very, very just it feels like they're very on top of everything. They're very organized. And sometimes as a person with ADHD, that can feel like you have some sort of moral failing, that you're not as organized as everyone else, or you might not be on top of emails like everyone else is. But it's been really a really great journey for me to kind of harness the positive aspects of ADHD so I can hyper focus and I can get things done quickly. I can make decisions quickly, more quickly than a lot of people can, or I can do multiple tasks at once. In fact, I need to do multiple tasks at once in order to get anything done. And I get to take that and kind of shape my project around things that I like to do and things that I'm good at. And it also enables me to reach out and ask for help when I need it. And it's been really powerful to be surrounded by people who are so supportive and so uplifting, and a community that is just very, very excited about my strengths and not my weaknesses. And it's been really nice actually to form a community around myself and to just be open to talking about this with people, because I think more people have ADHD than we know of. And it's kind of nice to know that you're not alone in such a vast and seems sometimes very structured field. It's nice to know that there are other people out there, and that you can work together to basically play against each other's strengths. So I find that really, really fun.
That's awesome. I love framing it as, as someone with ADHD, there are a lot of strengths that come with that. And even if there are like, if answering emails is the bane of your existence and something that your brain just can't do, that's okay. Like everybody has different things that they're good at and things that they're bad at. And it's so important to talk to scientists like you working in this field and doing like a super cool job with ADHD. So thank you, Lindsay. That's very cool. So, what got you into this kind of work in the first place? What got you into the ocean?
So I grew up on the ocean. I come from a harvester family, so my dad's a harvester. Both of my grandfathers on both sides of my family were working with the ocean or with the forest. And my dad comes from southern Labrador, so I have Inuit ancestry as well. It's in my blood, is what I always like to say. And I grew up on a boat. Like I learned how to walk on a boat. I've been fishing with my dad since I can remember. And it just seemed like a natural step to have a job on the ocean. Like there didn't seem to be any other answer for what I wanted to do with my life. I didn't want to be a harvester because I saw how difficult it was for my dad to be away all the time. But I knew I wanted to do something where I got to interact with harvesters almost every day. And that's something that I feel really lucky that I get to do. It has been a driving force because this is kind of a difficult field to be in. Sometimes conservation, and specifically ocean conservation, can be really like emotionally taxing because you're doing all this work and you're really optimistic about the work that you're doing. And sometimes it doesn't work. Sometimes what you do gets upended by a storm, or sometimes all the work that you've put into a place, it just gets ripped up by an ATV. And those things are real, and they can be really a really big inhibitor to people wanting to be involved in this. But I knew there was no other choice for me. I know how I feel when I'm on the ocean, and I can't replicate that feeling anywhere else. The feeling of connectedness with everything around me. It's a real privilege, I think, to be able to help the ocean, but also to learn more about it.
I love that. So, you use the term harvester a couple times. Do you want to explain what that is?
Yes, of course. Basically, fishing people. So my dad is a shrimp harvester. A lot of the people and harvesters that I work with, they harvest crab. They'll harvest cod. They'll harvest whelk, which is a type of sea snail. There are a lot of different fisheries here in Newfoundland and Labrador, And when I say harvester, I'm referring to people who make their livelihood by taking animals out of the ocean to sell.
Okay, cool. So it's not just like fisher, it's also like maybe someone that works in aquaculture and crabbers or lobsterers.
Yeah, exactly. And I also find it's a little bit more of a gender neutral term because a lot of people don't say fisher, they say fisherman. And the fishing sector has become a lot more diverse now than say when I was growing up. So I like to try to use as much gender neutral language as possible. And it's much easier to say harvester than for me to forget and say fisherman. So it's just a much friendlier term, I find.
So, hopping back a little bit, you mentioned eelgrass, and I know that you work a lot with eelgrass. Do you want to explain what eelgrass is and why it's so important?
I absolutely do. Full disclosure, before I started this job about a year ago, I had no idea what eelgrass was. And so, as I explain this, I think you're going to be surprised at how important eelgrass is and how little we talk about it. So, eelgrass is a type of underwater flowering plant, is my favorite way to describe it. Lots of times when we think about ocean plants, we think about what we really think about is algae, so seaweeds. So seaweeds are fairly simple. They don't have any roots. They only hold on to rocks through a holdfast at the bottom. It's almost sticky, and they transport nutrients in their body by diffusion, which is a very, very simple way. It's this very simple organism. Whereas eelgrass is an actual vascular plant and it does flower. So it has a root system, which is different from algae, and it also uses vascular systems to bring nutrients through the body when it performs photosynthesis. So there's around 72 species worldwide. Here in Newfoundland and Labrador, we have one, and it's just common eelgrass. So the scientific name is Zostera marina, which is a very pretty scientific name that I really like. They are considered ecosystem engineers. So essentially, wherever there's eelgrass meadows, they modify the environment around it. So they make water quality better because they really hold sediment in their roots. They sequester carbon, which is really important on a global scale. And they also decrease wave action in coastal areas, which helps with coastal erosion because these are really long and skinny, almost blades of grass is how I would describe them. And they grow in meadows and they decrease hydrodynamic energy in the area, which just means that the waves and the sea in that area are a little bit calmer than they would be in a place that doesn't have eelgrass. They are also very important nurseries for juvenile fish and juvenile crustaceans in the area. So they act as almost like a protection for these young species while they grow until they can get to a point where they can swim out to the ocean and kind of live out the rest of their adult life cycle. Seagrasses are actually disappearing at a really alarming rate right now, so about 7% per year globally, which is terrifying. But that's exactly what I do is I replace eelgrass loss in areas specifically around Placentia Bay, on more of the southern part of Newfoundland and Labrador, where we have experienced a lot of eelgrass loss because of green crab in the area. So they're very, very important, and I love to look at them. They're beautiful, they're a vibrant green, and they're really helpful for basically everything in the area.
Why? So you mentioned the green crabs, and we're losing eelgrass because of the green crabs. Where did the green crabs come from, and how common are they?
They are a particularly nasty species of invasive species. So they are believed to be introduced in Atlantic Canada in the 1950s. And most people think that this was through bilge water in the bilge of boats. So lots of times boats will come somewhere empty, pick up materials and then leave. But when you're sailing, you need a bit of weight in the boat, and a lot of places they'll actually suck up water from the area that they're coming from. and they'll use that in their bilge to give them weight when they cross the ocean. And then when they get to where they're going, they'll dispel it. And that means that it can carry a lot of larval stages of species that just don't really belong here, that we call invasive species. And so these invasive species can come in and then they outcompete a lot of the native species in an area. It's the sciencey name is called competitive exclusion. So this is a belief that two animals can't occupy the same niche in an ecosystem. So, for example, with green crab, they'll outcompete a lot of lobster, juvenile lobster, and a lot of the native crab species in the area. So rock crab, spider crab, species like that. And green crab are significantly more aggressive than a lot of the native species that we have here, and they eat a lot of the same food. So what that means is the green crab takes a lot of the food source from native species and it kind of makes them migrate over time to less desirable areas. And what I like to say is the big beef between green crab and eelgrass is that green crab is looking for food, and the way it looks for food is it digs up in sediment. So we call that bioturbation. And unfortunately, this means that it digs up a lot of the roots of the eelgrass that we have in the sheltered bays here. And you'll find just when the tide goes out after green crab have been in an eelgrass meadow, just blankets of green washed up on shore because they're digging for clams, they're digging for crustaceans, things to eat. And in that process, they just rip up everything around them. And it's devastating to be in any place that has been affected by green crab because it's desolate is the only word that I could use.
So it's not that the green crab themselves are eating the eelgrass, but they're digging it up so the eelgrass is just kind of dying. Am I getting that right?
Yeah, they come in and it's just like when you go weed your garden, you're digging at the roots of a lot of those weeds. The green crab are doing that exact type of thing, but to the eelgrass because they're looking for sources of food in the sediment underneath them.
Nice. Well, not nice, bad. And competitive exclusion, that makes me think of, me and my brother when we were growing up, we couldn't watch the two different TV shows at the same time. So there'd be competitive exclusion if one of us is stronger than the other to wrestle the TV remote away. So it sounds like the green crabs are wrestling the TV remote away from our native rock crabs.
Yeah, they are, and they're very, very good at it. Like they're extremely, extremely aggressive. Like I cannot, as someone who works with a lot of them all the time, they are extremely aggressive, and there's nothing really that native species can do to combat that. The only thing that scientific studies have found is if native species are bigger than the invasive species, and even then, lots of times native species just try to avoid them altogether. It's like avoiding a really aggressive person at work. You're kind of just like, I just don't want to work with them. So you're kind of working around them, and that doesn't work because if you can't work together, then it's just difficult all around. And so that's what they do. The green crab kind of like bully the native species out of the way to get what they need. And that means that native species are moving to places that are not nearly as desirable, which means that they aren't reproducing as much.
So let's say I'm out walking on the beach. Maybe I'm going for a surf or I'm just like strolling and I see two crabs. How would I tell the difference between a green crab and a rock crab?
I love this question because it's really interesting to find the different carapaces on the beach, so the shells of the crab. And lots of times you can do this without even having to interact with the crab, which is what my preferred way of doing it. So a green crab, I have a bias. They're just, everything about them is hostile. They have a shell that's like sometimes green, it can be orange. I typically don't go by the color, but they have 5 really sharp spikes on either side of their eyes. And I mean, they are razor sharp. They are so sharp. And they have almost like velvety legs. And then say a rock crab, which is the most common crab we have here in Newfoundland and Labrador. They have 9 bumps on either side of their eyes, and they're like scalloped edges. They're so soft and kind. So you can really see the difference there. The coloring can be different. Some rock crabs can be purplish, but again, lots of times if you're seeing something that's been left out for a while, color is really not a great option to go on. If you flip them over on their bellies are often different as well. Green crabs are almost shorter and more squat when it comes to their tail flap on the inside, whereas rock crabs are much more elongated. But mostly we'd go by the actual points on the shell itself. If it's pointy and there's 5 points on either side, it's a green crab. And that's when you take a photo. You would note where you did it. If you have the coordinates, you could write down the coordinates, the date and the time that you found the invasive species. And then depending on where you are, you can Google. It's basically just like report invasive species. And then DFO will provide you with the appropriate email, and you can send that information to them, and then they'll make a note. And then that usually a lot of times gets communicated to people like me who don't work directly for DFO, but they're working on projects funded by DFO. And then that kind of helps shape where we're doing these targeted green crab fisheries.
That's really cool. So I like to use something called iNaturalist, and I know that sometimes iNaturalist, this app, the research can be graded as research grade. Do you ever receive that kind of research, or is that just citizen science?
I find this really interesting because I actually didn't know what iNaturalist was until I just got back from an Oceanwise trip, and we did a whole session on iNaturalist. And so I'm trying to incorporate that now with different presentations that I'm giving, and I have to inquire actually on how I can use this information to help as well, because Newfoundland and Labrador doesn't have very many iNaturalist observations, but it is like an invaluable database for things, especially like invasive species, which we're having more and more issues with here.
So citizen science, if you don't know, for any listeners, it's when you contribute to science on your own. So let's say you're out looking at crabs and you find a green crab, you take your phone, upload it, and bada boom, bada bing, there's data in the cloud for anybody to see and use. So I kind of want to hop back to eelgrass again. So you mentioned that you monitor eelgrass and you've talked a little bit about some of the different technology you use. Can you tell me what it's like to monitor eelgrass and what kind of technology or science processes you use?
It's very wet, is what I would say, first of all. We like the project that I'm working on now through the Aquatic Ecosystem Restoration Fund at the Marine Institute. We are transitioning over into using a bit more technology for monitoring. So historically, a lot of eelgrass monitoring is done by snorkeling. So you're wearing a wetsuit with a mask and fins, and you swim and you pick a heading for a weighted line. And every 5 meters of that weighted line, you'll drop down a 1 meter by 1 meter square that has 100 tinier squares in it. You'll drop that on the bottom every 5 meters, and you count how many of those squares have eelgrass in them. So as you can imagine, that introduces a lot of human error. And some error is fine because you build that into your experiment. But if we can avoid that in any way, shape, or form, we try to do that. So you can imagine you're on your 10th line of the day, you're cold, you're tired, you're wet. I often can't remember what number comes after 7. So it gets really difficult to properly assess eelgrass then. So what we're trying to do is actually do this process, but do it with a remotely operated vehicle. So we use a pivot deep tracker. We're in the middle right now of trying to figure out how to accurately do this. So what this is it's difficult to explain. I would say it's about the size of a medium dog. It has 2 sets of propellers on it. It has a camera with a laser, And what it does is it lets us comfortably sit in a boat and operate the ROV, remotely operated vehicle, from the comfort and the warmth and the dryness of a boat. So it'll putter around on the bottom and take live video, and we sit and we record it on a tablet that we use to control it. And then afterwards, we would process that information in the lab, so you don't actually have anyone in the water. Another thing that we do is we use drones. So we have a drone that we use. We can program a flight path, and what it does is it will go up in the air and it flies over the site probably around 400 feet above. And then we put that information into a computer. It builds what we call an orthomosaic image. So it takes, say, 700 photos as it flies over an eelgrass meadow, and then we stitch them together. And then we use GIS to look and see how much of the coloring of the photo actually is eelgrass. And then we call it ground truthing this data. So we'll put a GoPro in the water at different coordinates to make sure that what we're looking at from the sky is eelgrass and it's not, say, a green kelp or a green seaweed. We look at it that way, and that lets us use sometimes AI to process these images. And we're also using a new thing called environmental DNA now to monitor the biodiversity that we're seeing in eelgrass, which is super exciting. And I can definitely talk more about that if no one knows what environmental DNA is. So, yeah, of course. So environmental DNA, when you walk around your house, when you walk around work, you're shedding hair, you're shedding skin cells. The world is just full of DNA, and the ocean is no different. So as fish live and grow, reproduce, excrete anything, they're releasing DNA. So do crustaceans, so do even some bacteria. They all have markers in the area that they're in. So this DNA kind of floats in the water. My team and I go in, we scoop up 1.5 liters of water in triplicate. So that means we scoop up 3 different samples of water. We take that back to our lab, and we have a special filter. So we put the water through a filter, and this filter will catch really, really small DNA particles. And then we take that, and a special lab here in St. John's processes it for us. And we have markers for fish. We have markers for crustaceans that they'll actually put in the lab to look for the species that we're interested in. And then we get a lovely report with a really, really cool tree of all the different classes and families of animals in the area. So we're seeing much more diversity through using eDNA than we would through regular like seining or trawling, because we don't actually have to see the animals to know that they're there. So it's very, very excited, and it's something that we call really non-invasive. So it means that we're not actually plucking a fish out of the water, terrifying it by measuring it and touching it and handling it. We're just scooping its DNA out of the water. And it's very cool and very exciting. And it's really, really exciting for me, if you can't tell.
I've heard a lot about eDNA lately, and it seems like it can really just change the way that we do a lot of ecology and conservation. It's very exciting. So, Lindsee, if you had a billboard that you could put across the planet, it was Lindsee's billboard, what would you want your billboard to say?
I would love it to say, the future of the ocean lies with local stewardship. And so that's just all fancy words for the people who are living in the areas that your research impacts. They should have the tools to be able to save and preserve the environment around them. I work a lot with harvesters in Placentia Bay, and the amount of knowledge that these people have is just incomprehensible. They're spending almost every day of their lives on the water. Some people I work with are 70, 80 years old, and they've spent every hour of the day, as long as the sun is up, on the water, interacting with the natural world around them. There's a curiosity there that is so untapped, and the future of a lot of these rural and local ecosystems, it is with the individual people in the area. Like, they're is so much potential, and people just need the tools to care and steward for the land around them and the ocean around them. And it's just something so special, and I learned so much from local people, and I really think it's important that research that I do and that most people do is accessible to the people that it's directly impacting. So I think a lot of academia is kind of very straight backed and inaccessible to someone who doesn't have a high level degree. And I think the whole point of what we do is to give power to the people in the areas that it impacts, and to have people grow up with a vast respect and knowledge of the world around them. And they can only do that if we're communicating in a way that makes sense to them. And I think it's the coolest part of my job is to get to actively empower people in the areas where they are to make a difference in the natural world around them.
I can imagine that would be just so fulfilling to work with people that know the most about the land, are the people that live on the land and work on the land and have been for generations. What Do Scientists Do is a podcast produced by Supernova at Dalhousie, a network member of ACTUA. For more information about Supernova and our workshops, summer camps, and high school programming, you can check us out at supernova.dal.ca. A huge thank you to Lindsee Clark for today's interview. It was super fun learning all about that kind of stuff. And we will see you next episode. Bye for now.